Barry Gordy just milked Stevie like a cow.
Hey everybody, welcome back in the shed. I'm Troy, this is Dave, and it is hot in Texas. It's about 8:30 at night, and the temperature is, let me just show you what it is. It's 94 degrees with no breeze. And we're probably gonna be sweating our butts off here pretty soon. But today we're talking about the top 3 prog rock bands, and Dave's gonna give us the definition of what prog rock is, because I'm guessing a lot of people don't really know what prog rock is.
Well, prog is short for progressive rock, sometimes called art rock, and it's really a style of music that saw its heyday in the 70s, but really got started in the 60s. I would say by groups like Moody Blues, that wrote these lengthy compositions and utilized, classical, jazz, folk, other kind of influences that were outside of the realm of standard pop formulas. So, there's a lot of great prog rock bands, and I'm a fan of prog rock. So, let's get rolling.
Let's do it. What's your number 3 prog rock band?
All right, my first prog rock band is Pink Floyd.
I should run you on.
Pink Floyd formed in 1965 in England, obviously, and it was with Syd Barrett and Roger Waters and the other members of the band. But when they first came out, they weren't really what I'd call prog rock, because it was before prog rock. They were more of a psychedelic kind of band, kind of trippy.
Emily tries but misunderstands.
Syd Barrett, who was the guitarist and main songwriter for Pink Floyd, he had a habit of dropping a lot of acid.
Yeah.
And eventually it caught up with them. And he ended up having to, leave the band, and was replaced by David Gilmour. And once David Gilmour came in, it took him more in a progressive kind of style of music. The first album really was that, got him huge was Dark Side of the Moon.
Run, rabbit, run.
The Dark Side of the Moon was one of the most important albums of the 20th century. It spent 736 weeks on the Billboard charts.
Yeah.
It probably became the longest charting album in history. And it really was the album that broke Pink Floyd through. And it was definitely in the prog rock vein. Of course, they had follow-up album, Wish You Were Here, which is a great album.
How I wish you were here.
And after that was Animals. And Animals is probably the most prog of all their... There was only 5 songs on the album. But lengthy compositions, which was a hallmark of prog. And I love that album. It was a huge album, but it wasn't the one that really put him over the top. And that album was The Wall. The Wall came out in 1979 when I was a freshman. Where, Troy?
In college, I bet.
Yes, I bet you it was. It was. That album was so huge. I mean, it really was the epitome of a concept album, which is a signature of prog. Everyone loved that album, as far as I know, back then. So many great songs, so many great guitar riffs by David Gilmour and leads. And then they had the final cut after that, which is actually one of my favorite Pink Floyd albums. If you're a Pink Floyd head like me, you'll love that album.
It's driving me insane.
You know, they split up after that, and David Gilmour ended up carrying on the band name after they had some legal wrangling over the name, and Roger Waters and David Gilmour have been fighting over this stuff for a long time.
Even today, I think they're still fighting.
Yeah, they are. But they did regroup in 2005 for this Live 8, I think it was. It was a benefit concert, and but after that they split up again, and that was that. And to this day, they've never regrouped, and probably are never going to regroup. And one of the members has died, but Pink Floyd is my number 3.
It's funny that you should mention Pink Floyd being your number 3 because it's also my number 3.
All right. Pardon me. So freaking hot out here, man.
It's horrible. Well, I think you pretty much said it all when it comes to Pink Floyd, except for the movie The Wall.
Yes.
Which is a weird freaking movie.
It's a very weird movie, and it had...
I think you have to watch it tripping on something to really understand what the hell the movie is even about.
And Bob Geldof played the role of Pink in the movie, and it had this really kind of cool animation. Yeah, the movie The Wall is one of those weird movies, man. I mean, I can look back in history at some of the movies that at the time I saw it and said, hey, man, that was really awesome. And then I look back at, 40 years later or whatever, and I go, I don't need to watch it all the way through again. It was, important at the time when they did it, and it was really a, popular movie, and I think Pink Floyd The Wall, the album at least, stands on its own merits.
Well, I'm sure you've heard that, I think, is it Dark Side of the Moon album?
You talk about Wizard of Oz?
That you can play it along with Wizard of Oz.
I did that.
I did too.
Far away across the field, tolling on the iron bell.
I remember when we were when I was in college, they used to say, "Oh, you can put on the CD." Because you had to put on the CD because you couldn't put on the album because you couldn't flip the album.
Right.
Or a cassette. So you put on the CD.
And you started the VHS movie exactly at that point.
At the third, like when the line roared. This is what we heard back in the day. When the line roars for the third time, you hit play on the CD, and the music will go along with the movie.
Balanced on the biggest wave, race towards another grave.
And what's cool is when Dorothy opens that door, it goes from black and white to color.
Yes.
And that's when the song Money comes on.
Really?
Because back in when they made Wizard of Oz, to make movies in color, it cost a lot of money.
That and Gone with the Wind were like the first two movies, and they came out in '39 at the same time.
Yeah.
But they were the first, I think, two movies that were done in color.
Yeah, but I remember being in college and watching the Wizard of Oz along with Dark Side of the Moon. So
yeah,
that was pretty trippy for sure. So anyway, that's Pink Floyd's my number 3 band. Also, what's your number 2?
Well, my number 2 is Rush. Rush is a band formed in Canada, Toronto, in early 70s. And, the original lineup was Alex Lifeson, Geddy Lee, and John Rutsey. After the first album, John Rutsey left, and that was a great album. That had Working Man and a lot of songs like
really?
that. By the second album, Rutsey had left, and Neil Peart joined the band. Neil became the principal lyricist for the band. They had that album Fly By Night and Caress of Steel, but really what kicked him over the top was the album 2112. The album 2112 featured this whole epic futuristic tale of this, society that didn't have music, and it took up the whole album side. The other half of the album had more, songs. When I was a teenager, I became a pretty big fan of Rush. I first got to see him on the Farewell of the Kings tour, and then I saw him again on the Hemispheres tour. And the Hemispheres album may be my favorite Rush album, but it's kind of hard to choose. But it's a little more obscure than some of the more popular ones. I then saw him again on the Permanent Waves tour. And that's the album where they really started getting more pop, Spirit of Radio, songs like that.
Begin the day with a friendly voice, a companion unobtrusive.
And then in I believe it was 81, the Moving Pictures album came out. And that was really the biggest breakthrough for them and probably their best album. I'd pick Hemisphere still, but as far as having so many songs on there, of course you had the song Tom Sawyer, which really became probably their biggest song.
Always hopeful yet discontent. Those changes are permanent. Oh, changes.
I saw him twice on that tour, actually.
Wow.
I was on summer break and I was in...
Summer break from college?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. My parents lived in Wisconsin, and I went up there and saw him on summer break. And me and my brother went to go see him in Alpine Valley, Wisconsin. And so I'm on that tour, and then I went back to college. And then probably 9 months later, I went to Knoxville with a bunch of buddies and saw him again. And then I think there was one more tour, Signals, which was the last album that I ever bought of Rush. And it was a great show. It had some good songs like Subdivisions. I'd have to say after that, Rush went more synth, and less what they were kind of known for. And that's probably the time I checked out. I never bought another album. But Rush is a great prog rock band. And they had that era from about, 75 to 84 or 83, something like that. And they stand the test of time. And then, they toured on forever. And then they kept kicking albums out. And they had their, I think it was a tour, final tour, I think it was 2015. And after that, Neil Peart died. He had cancer or something, and kind of killed any hopes of a reunion. But Rush is definitely one of the top 3 prog rock bands of all time.
They almost made my top 3 list. I mean, they probably should have made my top 3 list, but I had to put another band at least at my number 2, more recent band, a band from the 90s. It's Dream Theater.
Lost in the sky, clouds roll by and I roll with them.
Dream Theater formed in 1985. But they really didn't hit the big time until '92 when they put out the album Images and Words, which had a pretty big song called Pull Me Under.
Watch the spell falling, gives no meaning to love. Not today, not yet tomorrow, then some other day.
So that video was all over MTV in '92. I remember seeing it. I don't know, I can't remember if I ever bought the album, but what's really cool is our friend David Prater,
Yeah,
Grammy Award-winning producer, produced that album.
no kidding. We
Yeah.
did him in the shed.
Yeah, we had him in the shed. He was on our first round of In the Shed when we were interviewing local musicians, and he produced that album. I actually listened to the song on the way over here today, and I hadn't heard it in probably 30 years. And man, it jams.
Hold me under, hold me under, hold me under, I'm not afraid.
But that's pretty much, you know.
Yeah,
I
they
can't-
got some kick-ass musicians in that band.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Yeah,
I never really got into them after that. I think I had the album back in the day, and from what I can remember, because it has been so long ago, and you don't really hear Dream Theater on the radio anymore, but that song was, I mean, I don't know if it went to #1, but it was like one of those songs you saw the video on MTV all the time. And David Prater did an excellent job producing that album. I might see him soon.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Tell them I said hi.
I sure will. That's my #2. What's your #1? And I wonder if it's going to be the same as my #1. I have a.
Well, there's only really one band in my mind that rules the prog rock.
Yes. What could it be?
Yes.
Well, since you're the expert on prog rock and it's also my #1, take it away, Dave.
Yes was formed in the late 60s. The lineup back then was John Anderson, the vocalist, Chris Squire, the bassist, Bill Bruford, the drummer, Tony Kaye on keyboards, and Peter Banks on guitar. The first album really didn't go anywhere, whatever. And after that first album, I believe, Peter Banks left and was replaced by Steve Howe. Now they took it to a different level. Steve Howe, like I probably said before, is one of my favorite guitarists of all time. In I believe it was 70, put out the album, the Yes album. And it had, three pretty popular songs in the, catalog of Yes. Yours Is No Disgrace. Starship Trooper. And I've Seen All Good People. Now, also in 1971, they kicked the album called Fragile, which is probably their biggest selling album, or at least one of the most popular Yes albums. And that had the song Roundabout.
I'll be the roundabout. The words will make you out and out.
I love that song. That's one of my favorite Yes songs. I actually listened to it on the way over here.
Yeah, it's got-
even though I've heard it a million times, because it's one of those songs they play all the time on the radio.
Yeah, but it's got such great, bass line,
Yeah.
bass, Steve Howe's guitar.
Yeah, and that
all
little intro,
yeah,
clean.
Boom.
Yeah. And the bass is dum, 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 dum.
Yeah,
So good.
yeah, it's so good. In 1972, they put out the album Close to the Edge, which among the Yes audiophiles like myself, a lot of us consider that their best album. So you're talking about between 1971 and 1972, 3 seminal, stellar albums.
Wow.
These guys are prolific, man. I'm telling you, man, they're awesome. You know, Yes continued for several years. They had some lineup changes. Rick Wakeman joined the band, and really at the beginning with, I think, the Yes album. But they had so many albums. I gotta be honest, some of them I didn't really get into because it was really, really deep prog stuff. I mean, I'm telling you, man. They're one of those bands that reinvented themselves. And when I was in college again, they had the album come out called 90125. I always get it mixed up with 90120 for some reason.
Or 90210.
90210, there you go.
Not OU812 though.
OU812. But that was the album where Steve Howe left. Chris Squire was still in the band. He was really the only original member to carry out through all of Yes. Trevor Rabin is from South Africa, is a great guitar player. That album really took him to mainstream rock success. And it had, you know, a bunch of great songs, but of course, Owner of a Lonely Heart. The song Hold On. The album was full of hits, but
Was it a little less prog though? A little more mainstream?
I wouldn't call it prog at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
They were a little more pop rock. Because this was the 80s, I guess, wasn't
yeah,
it?
Yeah. Prog had already kind of faded by that point.
Yeah.
Like I said before, the heyday of, you know, prog was really at late 60s to early 80s.
Yeah. And it's got to be pretty difficult to keep writing such complicated songs
Yeah.
and having to remember them every time you go on tour and write more complicated songs and then remember those. So eventually I think you have to
But you know,
dumb it down just a little bit.
I actually saw Yes on a tour. Saw them in the round when I was in high school, where they played in this rotating stage, and it was really cool. And that was on the Going for the One tour. But later I saw them in the 90s, where Steve Howe came back and joined the band with Trevor Rabin, and they played a show I saw in Starplex at Fair Park. And that was a great concert. I mean, really to have Steve Howe and Trevor Rabin both there with the pretty much the original lineup, it was killer. I think Yes, in its incarnations they have now, are still touring. You got, you know, John Anderson in one camp, Steve Howe in another camp. But yeah, I think they're the best prog rock band of all time.
I totally agree, and that's why they are my number one also. So
All right.
he pretty much said everything I needed to say.
I took long enough to do it.
So that's our top 3 prog rock bands. Leave your picks below. And also make sure to subscribe to the channel. Get yourself some merch. We got a link below. We got all kinds of cool stuff you can grab. And we'll see you next time in the shed.
See ya.